support the operations and also the logistics that the IEBC takes into account in order to run an election in those countries. When you look at these factors, and we have studied these requirements very, very keenly, we see there is a little bit of a shortfall. First of all, those requirements, however stipulated as they are, do not take into account, in some respect, the population of the diaspora in specific locations. Where you may see that most of these allocations of where the polling stations are based in specific cities where the embassy, the High Commission, or the consulate is located. But as we know it today, you can have a High Commission or an embassy or a consulate in a specific location of the cities in these countries, but many Kenyans are populated, or rather are densely located in different locations. So that misconnect is still there. The other point is also the idea that you can only have a polling center, and we have to be clear here with our viewers and listeners, that a polling center is the central station where polling stations do report to. Okay. So you can have a polling center in an embassy, but you can also have a polling station. So if you remember, for those of you who voted in the diaspora, there were booths where you would go and line up in those booths. Those are the ones which were referred to as polling stations. But the embassy itself is considered a polling center.
Okay.
The idea was that when you have a polling center and polling stations located at only an embassy, a High Commission, or a consulate, it brings, again, the shortfall that we've talked about. So those are not enough to be there. But the IEBC has always argued that if you look at the Regulation 34 of the IEBC, it states that that's the requirement, and that's what the statutory requirement is. So therefore, we were very glad to see the IEBC coming to Parliament to seek the reconsideration of that interpretation. And that reconsideration will mean that they could put an embassy, or rather a polling station, as I say, in another location. And that would be very good for the diaspora because it might be nearer where these densely populated areas that we've talked about.
So, Dr. Martin, you talk about the density aspect, and some of us are actually very curious to find out how the IEBC arrived at that. I'm happy there's been a very street talk, because I'm waiting for the very final word when IEBC will actually engage the public and discuss this at large. But that on the side, one of the main issues that will erupt from this, and probably it could be also your concern, being that you work in the tech industry, one of the issues as we look to expounding the countries that can engage in voting, and this means by large Kenyans, how do we do that without compromising the election integrity? Because that has remained a big issue, Dr. Martin.
Yeah, indeed. And you're right, because when you look at the legal and constitutional interpretation, there is the word which has always been referred to as progressive. That means IEBC can always claim that we are progressive. So they might say, in 2022, we had 12 countries. In 2027, we have 16 additional countries. According to IEBC, that is progress. And according to the Constitution and the spirit of the Constitution, it could be looked as a progressive way forward. But the word and the meaning, both in paper and on the ground, do not match, because we interpret progress differently, because we need to be clear. For example, what criteria determines which countries are added? And I think IEBC needs to be very clear on that, so that we are very sure that the reason they added, for example, in the case of Europe, let me take it in the case of Europe, and I'm not having a go at anybody, but the reason they left out a country like France, it should be very clear to us why that is the case. And when you look at the transport system in France, it's very, very effective. If you look at the even flights that enter into France are very open and stuff like that. So there are specific questions that we need to ask when it comes to this. Again, when you look at Europe, you'll find that some countries are very much nearer each other. And therefore, it's important to look at where you are putting that particular polling station and how it will be reached. A good example is also West Africa. They've talked of Ghana and Nigeria. These countries are very, very much close.
Yeah.
The question would be, would it have made sense to have at least one of those countries and then one other country somewhere in the West, near where you have Senegal, or in Dakar, for example, where you have so many Kenyans and very many international institutions.
Yeah.
And then when you take again an area like, for example, the southern part of Africa, they've actually taken Mozambique, and I think Mozambique is truly, has a large number of Kenyans, and that's true. And the question is, when you look at Mozambique, then when you look at countries such as maybe Lesotho, Eswatini, they're very close, so they can always commute to Mozambique, which makes sense. But then when you look at the geographical placement of specific locations that they've chosen, what is the rationale? So that's number one. The second one, the issue around could this selective expansion trigger legal issues? Because the diasporans might go to court and say, we have been unjustifiably left out because this expansion has excluded us, meaning, so therefore the idea around how the IEBC explains, interprets, and even goes to the extent of justifying the choice of country becomes critical. The IEBC also needs to meet the constitutional expectations. Right now, we are talking about 15 plus years, and therefore that issue of progress should be really measured not only in words, but also in the amount of finances. There has to be enough finances that can go into this particular issue. So when you look at the legal and constitutional interpretation, there are specific concerns that can be raised. However, as we all know, everything is tied into, there's a cost. And we've argued that these costs, some of them come in form of the operational costs, and some of them come in terms of logistic costs. And some of these costs, and when you look at the budgetary and the cost implications, we talk of the international logistics, because you have to get the material from Kenya and all the paperwork in their security form, very well secured, transported from one point of the IEBC to this particular location abroad. So that's number one. So there's that international logistics. Then you have staffing and training. The IEBC needs to make sure that some of their staff whom they've recruited are trained to the level that is understandable. I don't want to be an IEBC spokesperson, but I'm just assuming these are some of the considerations. But we need also to leverage that. So the diaspora is asking, can we be part of that ecosystem so that they don't have to train everybody in Kenya to bring them here, but the diasporans can better participate? And then thirdly is the lingering issue, and you mentioned it actually, the issue of technology.
Maybe
and how secure.
Maybe before we proceed, Dr. Martin, if you can hear me, I am
Yes,
being reminded that our audience on our X Space are unable to actually grab the audio that you are presenting, and you've been talking about very heavy stuff here. So allow me to look into that, even as we try to ensure that everyone is well taken care of. Again, I really want to apologize to Obeds. Let me just cross over to Obeds as we try to reconfigure the system to allow everyone to be able to present. Obeds, if you can hear me, I don't know if you're able to catch any of the questions, and so far, if you're able to follow through. Pardon me.
No, we haven't. Actually, it's been a struggle. And Flavia is actually joining us here, and she's here for an hour. She couldn't get anything. And I don't think anybody's getting anything from this end. So if you can fix that problem, and then we can try and follow, because there's so much we've missed.
All right, let's see how that works, because that is
Eli, I don't know
yes. Let's find out if that is able to be redone. In the meantime, welcome once again to the conversation tonight, and we are discussing and having a talk with Dr. Martin. And for those of you who were trying to just follow the conversation, so far we've been able to look at some of the main issues that will arise from the aspect of expanding into more voting blocks, and that is from the diaspora community. The issue of the election integrity, it's one thing that, of course, is bothering Dr. Martin. I'm going to try and see how we are able to resolve that. So kindly allow me to just flip through my possible channels and see if Obeds and colleagues will be able to get me. Obeds, if you can hear me. All right, we seem to be having echo bounce back from Obeds and colleagues. So that means we might not be able to proceed now. Obeds? All right, these things happen quite a lot, Dr. Martin. I think I need your services right now to be able to
Sure.
to deploy you in order for you to help me fix Obed's problem. So as we do that, again, many apologies to all of you who are following. We'll be able to resolve that in a few minutes. Let me just get to you, Dr. Martin, and I hope I will not be able to throw you off balance because as a daktari, these are things you treat on the go. So you've talked about the issue of the election integrity. I would love for us to look at something else here, and that for me is the issue that now surrounds what I will refer to as the budgetary and effectiveness concerns that come with whatever IEBC is going to, look into. So the operational cost and low voter turnout has always been one of the reasons why politicians and government itself has questioned why should we actually put our money into this? And probably I'd like to get your perspective on that, Dr. Martin.
Thank you very much. And just to clarify, I was actually explaining how the voting can be facilitated to help. I'm not trying to criticize the integrity. I'm sure there's so many equipments and kits that can do that. But coming back to your question, it's a very important part. And this argument has been made in various platforms.
Let us know when you are able to, or if you can test
parliamentary
it,
committee is
verify. Don't know
making
if you
this
can hear me.
argument where why would the IEBC or indeed the country invest more in expanding the voting and the polling points for diaspora if out of what they call the population of diasporians, which are, it's been counted out there to be roughly about 4 million diasporans, assuming that we have maybe 1.5 who are eligible to vote, why would that number, which is quite large, have only 10,400, depending on the statistic that is out there, be able to vote in 2022? So that means the voter apathy is not as high as it was thought. But we've tried to rebuff this argument that it's not that diasporians don't want to vote. It has been an issue of very many factors. And one of them is indeed the issue of the cost of somebody voting in the diaspora. And let me give just this in context, because I know we have very many listeners, probably in different parts of the world. But let me take the US as an example, because that's where we have the largest number of diasporians. We looked at the travel cost from different points of the US. And on average, in the US, for example, you have 3 areas where diasporians were meant to vote in 2022. It was either in Los Angeles, which is LA, where we have a consulate, or in Washington, DC, where we have our embassy, or in New York, where we have our UN representative office, which is there. These places, we did a calculation, and on average, just imagine that for you to vote in a presidential election in the diaspora, you have to make 3 trips to that point of voting post. Meaning you have to go, first of all, and register. That means that's 1 trip. You have to go and verify. That's another trip. And then you have to go and vote. So on average, you're talking of 3 trips. In calculation, we came to the figure of roughly about 150 to 175,000 Kenyan shillings for 1 trip, because you haven't added things like accommodation for a diasporian, food, and in case you've got a family of 3 or 4, you can imagine the cost. So therefore, one of the biggest limiting factor has been the cost of voting. One can argue, well, diasporians, you have enough in terms of, but we don't have enough money as everybody thinks, because we are different. So that is one cost. The other issue, which is very, very, very critical, is this issue of the mismatch between the areas where diasporans are densely located vis-a-vis where the voting polls are. When you look at that, then you get this very huge mismatch that exists. Let's take for example, Germany. In Germany, Berlin was the polling station and indeed the polling center for Germany. And when you look at Berlin and Frankfurt, there are so many Kenyans in Frankfurt, which is now arguably the financial capital of the EU. And you would have expected that there would have been some consideration of putting Kenyans in that place. And even to make it worse, take the Scandinavian countries. They did not have anywhere to vote. Therefore, it meant people who were in Norway, Finland, Denmark, and Sweden would have to travel exactly what the reality was at that time. So therefore, the cost of voting is prohibitive, and even the mismatch of data. And then thirdly, and this is the most important one, Eli, which we have been able to push very hard, is that there are specific technologies that are out there that can really reduce the cost of this overburdening of a diasporan to go and vote. For example, to verify that you are indeed the person who went and registered should not require a diasporan going with that voter's card back to the point where they were in order to verify that. So we have technology. So what we are calling here is lightweight technology that can be embedded on top of the existing technology that is prescribed by the Constitution to be used to make sure that it is convenient for the diaspora to vote. So the argument is that it is also a pushback that says, let us make it convenient for diasporan to vote so that we can enable more people to participate in the political and in the governance process of the country. And then lastly here is the issue around the awareness. It has always been argued that diasporans are online, they are on these platforms, they don't need to have any awareness, they know exactly what they need to do, but that's not the truth. We need to make sure that we sensitize not only the generation that we know is kind of like the first generation, second generation, but even our young diasporians. And we are talking about aged between 18 and probably 35, who actually are so much disconnected with this kind of process. And it's important that we bring them into the political process. So the issue around civic education, for example, the issue around participatory meetings where when IEBC comes, we include all the people in terms of information flow is important. And then the persistent and the consistent way that IEBC will work with the diaspora will determine the success of the numbers. Back to you. Thank you.
All right, that is Dr. Martin. And Dr. Martin has been able to really talk a lot about the issues that we need to look into if we have to fix our election issues. And that is specifically for the diaspora community. I hope now Obed is able to hear me. Obed, if you can hear me, once again, let me get back to you. Good evening. Obed? All right, I guess Obed is unable to hear me. Do we have anyone?
Eli,
Yes, can you hear me? Obed? All right. Obed, can you hear me? All right. Let's get on moving. Do we have any other speaker online on the other end? Obed, can you hear me?
Eli, if you're talking, I can't hear you at all.
All right. Let me get Obed some mic here because clearly he's unable to hear me. Daktari, these things are very interesting. I think I need to get some lessons from you. Obed, can you hear me?
As they say, technology never
Yeah.
disappoints. But when it disappoints,
Yeah.
it
Let's
does
find
it in
out
its
if
own way.
Obed can hear us. Obed, can you hear us?
Yeah, I can hear both of you now.
Awesome. Let's just get this thing rolling.
Thank you. That was very good. Okay.
It's finally here, and we are joined on the other line by Obed. Obed, welcome once again. Great to have all of you joining the line finally.
Yeah, it's been very interesting that we are silent participants. Ideally, that's how it should be. You should be heard in silence. there's very little that we've really picked from the conversation. I don't know if you're gonna have to make our guests to repeat what you said. The only thing I've had is that an example of diasporians in the US, like people have to go 3 times to California. So I'm not so sure if the rest were able to hear much of the conversation. But I have on the space, I've got Flavia who would like to make a contribution at some point. So maybe you do a summary of what you've been able to do, and then we can have that conversation, because then otherwise we can't be able to participate.
All right. Now,
Yes,
now you see summary is needed. That's why I have the
yes.
best man in the room. We have Daktari, and doctors can be very, very precise. Na huyu ni daktari wa ukweli. Kuna wengine tumeona mahali. But let's, okay,
Ni
Daktari.
daktari wa watu ama daktari wa letters?
Oh, he's a doctor of letters. I think him and Paul will be friends. Yes.
Yes, I can try to summarize these issues. I think just for the listeners on X who have missed a bit of this, we covered roughly about 3 main issues. And what Eli had actually prompted me to talk about were the kind of like, what are the kind of like the legal and constitutional interpretation of this progressive nature of how IEBC should be able to involve diasporians into the electoral process, the political participation, and indeed the governance of the country as we know it today. And the 3 points that were very clear was that it is important for us to also understand the criteria of how IEBC chooses countries to participate in the electoral process, especially in the diaspora. I went through what is in their regulations. They consider 4 factors. One is the security relationship that Kenya has with that country. They consider the issue around the existence of an embassy, consulate, or a high commission. And then they also look at as far as the cost and the budget. So these are some of the 4 key areas. But in that, we've seen that there is a mismatch when it comes to aligning that priority with the areas of those countries where Kenyans are densely populated. We find a mismatch. The US is a good example. And then we also see that when it comes to the issues around, first of all, the mismatch of aligning that kind of like the density of the populated, and also the cost implications that this positioning of those diaspora centers create. So the criteria is important. And then secondly, there was an issue around, could this expansion also trigger what we call some legal challenges? Because countries can come up and say, or diasporans in various countries can say, look, we've not been considered, we've not been given a chance to prove what we can offer in terms of the priorities that the IEBC has. So why were we left out? And I think that's a legitimate question that many of them can ask. So therefore, it's important and incumbent to the IEBC to be very clear in explaining that. And then the expectation at the moment, we have gone 15 plus years, and there's a need to really revisit that issue of progressiveness. And in my view, we should have what we call some metrics that will compel IEBC to match those metrics as we go ahead. So that was one issue. Then the other issue was that really brought a very good discussion was the idea around how does the IEBC deal with the budgetary cost and the implications. And there were 3 points that were very clear. We know that the IEBC has to invest in the logistics. There's international logistics, sending the staff in, sending the items for voting, ensuring the security, training individuals. So we expect staff to be trained. And also the technology deployment, because they have to send KIMS kits, they have to make sure they are working, they have to make sure they have extra just in case things don't work. So these issues of logistics and how you organize this kind of an election is not easy, and there's a cost element to it. We've put across to the IEBC as diaspora and said, could the diaspora also participate in making sure that they provide the human resource that is required? We know the IEBC wants to have responsibility from A to Z of their staff, so that if there's anything that goes wrong, they know who to blame. But we are saying we can offer at least a buffer in terms of some of the human resource implications. And then lastly, there was the issue around the logistics and complexity. Deployment of trained officials, we know that's an issue. There is the issue around the secure transportation of the sensitive information, especially after the elections, before and after, and even during the election process. We've also talked about the coordination, especially between embassies and different consulates with the IEBC now that they've increased the portfolio. So that brings what we call the complexity of the operations that are expected. So in summary, we've covered a bit of that. And just one more point that we talked about was the issue around does the issue of having a lower number of voters, like in 2022 when we have 10,444, does it discourage the investment that is made to the expansion? Could that be a factor that parliamentarians need to be able to hinge on to say, then we don't give you any more budget? Our argument is that I think that particular point is not true today, because when you look at the cost of voting in the diaspora, which is the point that Obedzai made at the end there, of people traveling from one point to the other, is extremely high. And then when you look at the issues of convenience of voting, it's made so difficult. And that shouldn't happen to a community of diasporians who remit. And just let's be clear, we remitted in 2025 over $5 billion. That is over 650 billion Kenya shillings. So you cannot really disenfranchise a constituent of a country that brings that kind of revenue to the country. Back to you, Eli.
Interesting perspective there by Dr. Martin Koyabe. Dr. Martin Koyabe is a Kenya Diaspora Leader based in the UK. He's also a Diaspora Technical Working Group member. And he said, for the purposes of clarity, so that we don't leave any room for people to start and gossiping here and there, he is a strong UDA party member based in the diaspora. Obeds, I think it's now my honor and privilege to officially say our X space is finally live and kicking. I think the donkeys were tired, but tumelazimisha sisi. We don't spare them. Obeds, over to you.
That's good. I like the summary that he has done. He is clearly a doctor of letters and words at the same time. That said, interesting points that he raises, and one of the things that I think I pick out is the logistical problem and the fact that there's a budgetary concern around the process and the element of logistics in terms of how the security movement of sensitive information and any apparatus that is required. So I do not know if also the element of the fact that there is time differences between different locations, how does that play a part in probably deterring people from voting? Because are we supposed to match voting with the Kenyan time? And that would mean sometimes probably in other places it's probably night or quite inconvenient for people to be able to vote. That's probably maybe a minor concern, but I would think it would fall into the logistical problems that maybe they would have to have and look at how, and the cost there too, especially to the people who have to arrange and make sure that they vote, and maybe that would discourage the numbers. But I totally agree on the element that if the diasporians are not allowed to make their contribution and they remit a lot to the country, it's really a bit of a skewed way, and it's unfair totally, because there are Kenyans who deserve to be able to participate in matters governance and elections in their country. And so it is imperative that there has to be some sort of a work in progress, or progressively be able to develop and improve the numbers, but at the same time guaranteeing that their vote also counts and it matters, because it's important that be the case. So I'll leave it at that, Eli. I have Flavia, who's on the space. I don't know if you're ready to have maybe a contribution from this end, and then we can go back to...
We have been talking to ourselves for a long time. We've been the stars of the session. We don't mind listening from your end. And I know Flavia is equally a very strong voice when it comes to matters, politics and governance. I'd love to hear what she thinks about the topic of the night.
And I think, that's the point. Flavia, that's your cue for you to make your contribution. And nice to see you after a long time. Karibu sana. Please feel free to make your contribution to the topic and any other subject related to this matter.
Asante sana Mzee Obeds. Thank you for having this space as usual.
Ilibidi tu nikubali hivyo tu Flavia. Sawa.
Stella is the one who started it, blame her. After such an introduction from Eli, I mean, how would I refuse to speak on the matter? Again, thank you for having these conversations. I think we've realized in the past couple of years that this space conversations, this outside of Bunge conversations, are the ones which are actually moving the country to the right direction. So thank you for taking the mantle on that. I'm going to pick up on a few issues. Probably he would help me answer some of them. Probably some of them are misinformed, and I am happy to be guided on the same. The IBC is supposed to have a stakeholder, what is it called? Not even a stakeholder engagement. Before that, election operation plan. I have not seen that election operation plan. Even as of January, when they were reporting to Parliament, they did not have that election operation plan. Why I am going to that is it's on the basis of the election operation plan that there's supposed to be a stakeholder engagement. And part of the stakeholder engagement is that they're supposed to engage some of the stakeholders in diaspora. Again, I go back to the point that has been raised by the Daktari. They're supposed to engage some of the stakeholders in diaspora so that we can determine which other countries are going to be involved in the voting process, and even in the case of US, which other regions are going to be involved in the voting process, same as Germany and any other bigger country. And my concern around that was two things. One, in terms of timelines. I believe if something like that is going to happen, we are about maybe 14 months away from elections. I believe that is something that they are supposed to have started working on. And if they are working on it, or if they plan to work on it, I am curious to understand what is the criteria that they are going to use to determine who are the stakeholders in diaspora that they are going to engage so that they can determine, because they said representatives. And I was like, oh, okay, how do you arrive on who is the rightful representative? But they said they're going to engage representatives. So I'm curious in terms of timing, when they are going to do that, and equally curious in terms of selection criteria on how they're going to arrive at the representative, so that we can ensure whatever the representative is voicing is actually the voice of the people on the ground. And then in addition to that, they were supposed to begin registration sometime in January. And that goes to what also Daktari has pointed out in terms of dissemination of information on what IBC is doing. As of now, I have not had any information about any registration that is going on. To that end, I can presume that registration has not commenced. Again, the issue of timing. When is that supposed to happen? When is it going to happen? If it is happening, why are they not adequately communicating so that as many people can be involved, so that they can be
Just
part
to
of
be
the
clear,
process?
just to be clear,
Yes.
Nasambo, you're talking about registration. Are you, because our concern is really on the diaspora voter. Which registration are you talking about?
Are there no new, like maybe someone who's turned 18 and then they're Kenyan and then they would like to register as voters?
No, again, let me just get your question. Probably Dr. Martin got it, but I didn't. Are you
Yeah, I
referring?
got
So
it. I got
Eli,
it.
Yeah, go ahead.
okay, sir. Well, I don't have to repeat it because Martin got it.
Yeah, I got it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's by registration, I mean the younger generation that would like to be part of the election process. I believe some of them came here when they are younger and they would like to be part of that. Or some people came here and they were in Kenya and they would like to change their, what is it called, their polling station. So I think that is what I mean by registration of the voters. I hope that's the rightful word to use. And of course, I am keen to see expansion of polling stations beyond maybe just LA. It will be good to, because I know in the US, there are more people in fact, there are more people maybe in Texas and other areas. So it will be nice to see that it expands to that end. So to that extent, I think it's just on us to wait on them. But for me, I am keen on that election operation plan so that stakeholder engagement can commence and it's timely, because there's some decisions that are being made by IBC, including like the kind of systems they are going to use, maybe not yet made, including that polling stations that they are going to have in different areas. And I think that is part of stakeholder engagement that ought to be done. And if they do not have that operation plan in place, then I think we are slowing on what is supposed to be done before the elections. I've been here and there, but I hope I've been clear. So I pass it on back to you, Obed.
Thanks, Flavia. I think you raise good questions, and I think it's necessary that we get to hear what we think about it. And especially, Ella, I think, given the fact that our guest is in the Diaspora Working Committee, maybe these are some of the things, if they've been addressed, he probably would clarify or, be able to guide on what would be done, but also the concern about timing. And we've already talked about the logistical element about going about it. It's not going to be quite easy because Parliament hasn't approved the statutory documents that were presented. I don't know how it's going to be. So are we looking at this being a possibility, or is just a work in progress, or something that might not happen? It's too close for 2027 and maybe should be considered for 2032.
Quite interesting questions coming from Flavia and, of course, Obed, asking if the Diaspora Technical Working Group has been able to, converse around these issues. And for the sake of those who are just joining the talk tonight, we are discussing matters elections and the desire by IEBC to expand its voter presence in terms of you as a Kenyan. If you are living in the diaspora, IEBC is in the plans to push for more funds to ensure that it's able to not only have more voting centers in the diaspora, but in this case also register new voters. And probably I am very interested in that aspect of registration of new voters, Daktari, which Flavia is raising, because earlier on I know I have had the privilege to engage a little bit with the team from IEBC, courtesy of the Diaspora Technical Working Group, and I do know, in fact, it has been in the papers before when the Gazette notice came out. I think there was a press statement and notice that was given by IEBC that they will be having the continuous voter registration exercise, but the diaspora community will be left out. Maybe that is where I want you to start. And again, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Koyabe does not speak for the IEBC. He's speaking from the aspect of the engagement he has had in the past with the IEBC team. So let's not confuse these two, okay? We do not have the authority to speak on behalf of IEBC. We speak on behalf of the information that this gentleman and the group that he works with has been able to exchange with the IEBC team. So, Dr. Koyabe, I'll again give you the opportunity to first start with that question, and then you can tackle the rest. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Eli. I think you have qualified to be my lawyer. You've protected me very well in terms of the disclaimer. But back to the issues that have been raised. Let me be just, because I'd set my mind in a certain way. Let me respond to Obed's, because he had raised a very important issue, especially when it comes to the opening and the closing of the polling station. I myself participated as what you call an agent of a party in London. And I experienced from A to Z the process. And for sure, what is there right now in the regulation?
UDA party, because, or did you change along the way?
Of course, I was representing the UDA party at the time. So let me.
Good to have this.
I mean, it's in public domain. So
all right.
There's nothing that we can hide about it. But the point was, what we experienced was that the timings of opening and closing are based on the times of the local jurisdiction. So, for example, if the opening and closing in Australia starts a day before we start our day, that is exactly how it will be, whereby the times that are with that particular location is what will be followed. So you might find the closing times in California are different from the closing times in New York or Washington, D.C. because of the time difference. And that was accepted as one of the issues that was brought up. In fact, actually, there was a petition that brought up this kind of challenge, and it was agreed under the regulations of the IEBC. And if you look at some of the regulations, they actually let the closing, the opening and closing to be based on the local time, not the Kenyan time. So that clarification was done. There's also an interesting part, which I think, Eli, we need to talk about at some point. What documents are eligible for voting? We know we've talked about an ID and a passport. Is it the passport? Is it the ID? So we'll touch on that. But I know, in summary, last year or the last election cycle, we used both. So both the ID and the passport were eligible. In this particular cycle, there is a little bit of some petition that has already gone forward, where there was a court pronounced that the passport will be the legal document to be used in the diaspora, apart from the countries within the East African community, where an ID has been agreed to be used across the borderlines of those countries. So we are expecting that a passport will be the legal document that will be used for registration and also for eligibly allowing a diasporan to vote. Now, there is a petition that has been put forward, I believe, with Omtata to make sure that that is looked at. So that is already going through the course. But coming back to the points that were raised about the need for voter registrations, the need for a timeline that IEBC should come out. In our understanding, that is something that they are working to release. We know that they haven't started what we call the electoral and the enhanced continuous voter registration in the diaspora. That was actually put out in the recent meeting they had with the parliament. They requested for an additional budget so that they could kickstart this process. Understandably, we understand in January of next year is when they plan to start that electoral voter registration, enhanced voter registration. What we have asked on behalf of the Diaspora Technical Working Group, and let me also clarify, the Technical Working Group is a very neutral platform. Of course, we've got our leadership with Danson Mukile, who is in the US, very active in this, and other leaders within that particular ranks. We've been working quite hard to make sure that we bring everybody on board to work towards what we call common issues that are facing the diaspora. And the idea around putting a timetable or a timeline, as alluded by, I think one of the the speakers, it's very, very vital so that we can plan where to plug in, whether it is civic education, whether it's engaging the diaspora in terms of what technology, or even just giving the diaspora what we call timely information. And I think that's something that we are basing that the IEBC can come up and give it to us. What we know is that the enhanced continuous voter registration, they've said it will start around January. They're yet to clarify the timelines in terms of the timing. We have also requested that the time that they give us should not be what they did last time, which was 15 days. We've requested that it should be 60 to 90 days so that it allows as many diasporians, including the young voters who are coming in, and indeed to have people get the time, because remember, diasporians need to ask for permission to leave their place of work so that they can go and register. Remember, when we talk about diaspora, talk about our colleagues in Oman, in Qatar, in UAE, and Saudi Arabia. So in the Middle East, it's even a more challenging issue because they have to be allowed by their own employers to leave the house. If, let's say, you're in a house and you're working, you have to leave that house so that you can go and register. You have again to ask for permission to leave that house to go and vote. You have again to ask for permission to leave that house to go and verify. So you can imagine all these inconveniences. And in some jurisdictions, that can't be allowed, knowing how some of these restrictions are. So therefore, the idea around that is important. There was a word that was used about flexibility. How do we make sure that it's more convenient? Remember, the tag word here is convenience for a diaspora to vote. And one of them is the flexibility to choose where you were or where you want to vote from. Now, remember, this is also being driven by technology. The KIMS kits have roughly about 700 marks. So therefore, for them to be able to know how many people are going to vote from a specific polling station, it has to be embedded with the people who have registered on that particular KIMS kit.
Correct.
Now, with the technology that we have, once you've registered on the KIMS kit, there is a window that is provided by the IEBC for you to change where you want your voting to take place. So if you miss that window, then you are compelled to vote where you had indicated earlier. But there has to be a way of flexing that. It's just that it's very difficult technologically to flex that, but also be aligned and compliant with the Constitution. Because there will be a little bit of movement of people shifting. Sometimes people can use that to subvert the process, to say that you have shifted, you're voting from here, and therefore disenfranchised from diaspora. So there is the need to be flexible, but the window for flexibility has to be placed so that we can be able to manage that point. One last point, Eli, and of course for the listeners, is that the Diaspora Technical Working Group has contacted IEBC, and of course working in conjunction with the State Department of Diaspora Affairs, to see whether we can host what we are calling a Diaspora IEBC dialogue, so that these pertinent questions that are being raised here could be placed at the actual, what we call doorstep of IEBC for them to respond. And they're very keen to have that dialogue. We have a date, which is roughly about the 14th of May. So for those of you who have diaries and you have your calculators and your diaries, please, you can mark that date. But more information will come out on how we are planning this dialogue to take place. It will definitely be virtual to allow that most of us be participants. So just to come back to that issue, there will be a provision. We are seeking an audience with IEBC, and gladly they've listened to us and they've offered us that particular window. And hopefully we shall be able to communicate more so that you can be able to bring as many questions as possible for IEBC to answer. Back to you, Eli.
Asante sana. That is Dr. Martin Koyabe, and being able to answer some of the questions that are coming from you, the listener. I know, Nasambu, you might have some follow-up questions. I'll therefore give you the opportunity to just go ahead and directly ask, if any. And if you are satisfied, we also need to know. If not, we will add you more food in this conversation. The bigger picture right here on Court FM. And of course, for all of you who are listening in, karibuni sana to this conversation that does not just engage you and I, it engages the minds of the policy makers and those who have been given the consent to ensure that your rights are respected as a Kenyan diaspora, as a Kenyan voter also residing in Kenya. By the way, as of last week, Kenya had gotten new registered voters standing at 1.37. I'm very curious to find out where we are today. That is 1.37 million. And I'm curious to find out by the end of this week how those numbers will be playing a lot. One has to admit the drive and the zeal that has come from the young people who have been on the front line to ensure that you and I get to be registered as voters, especially if you haven't done that in the past. We must tell them Congolais, well done. However, will that vote translate to the change you so much desire, or is it just another bragging right? We'll find out, because kesho mumepanga maandamano, bei ya mafuta imepanda. Nafikiri tutatumia petroli, na kama si petroli tutatumia kerosene. If I targeted these things during my high school times, the HR, not the HR, but the headmaster will come for me. Mbono unaongelea mambo ya petroli? Nataka kuchoma dormitory. Nasambu, the mic is yours.
Shule yenu petroli ilitumika kuchoma dom peke yake, haikukuwa kwa maharagwe?
Maharagwe sisi, we were very Catholic and very friendly to Jesus. He was taking care of everything else. Wait, got back to the conversation.
All right. Again, I am sorry I have to step away. Monday is usually quite engaging for me, but I am happy again, Eli and Obed, that you're taking time to hold this, and Daktari for joining the platform. Now that we are declaring the parties that we are supporting, Mimi ni Linda Mwananchi to the end. But just to tie the issue that I have spoken on to the Constitution, of course, the Constitution provides the right for the citizens to vote. And if there is any monetary limitation in terms of having to travel and spend about 160,000 you as one person, then of course that is a limitation on its own. So I really, really hope, I understand the limitation also IBC is experiencing. And I hope we grow to an era where we can trust mail voting, we can trust maybe electronic voting. I don't know how that would work. I hope we grow to that era, but as of now, I hope they can put more effort so that more people can be accessed. And it's not even just about increasing the polling station. Also, it's them being a bit more proactive in terms of developing the election operation plan so that stakeholders can be engaged in the different decisions that are being made by them, which are important and would require a buy-in from the different stakeholders. So I hope they are quick on their action. And I know they want that 22 billion from Parliament. I know they are pushing for it, but I don't think everything is tied to that. So I really hope they can be quick on their action so that as stakeholders, both diaspora and back at home, can be involved in the major decisions that they are making so that they can have our buy-in. I think that is very important for us, not just to vote, but for us to also trust whatever process is going to result from our votes. So Eli, Obet, thank you so much. Looking forward to be part of more of this conversation. I will schedule the session you've indicated, but kwa leo asanteni sana.
All right. Thank you very much, Nasambu, and of course, looking forward to engaging in the future conversation. I would love to cross over back to you, Obeds, and if you have any follow-up questions for Daktari, I know he'd be more than happy to engage you, sir.
So thanks, Eli, and thanks, Flavia, for finding time for us. I like what I'm hearing, and I think there's a plan to it. Though sometimes even when they say there's a method to madness, this is a bit difficult if you think about it. There are so many moving parts that need to be thought through very well, because in reality, different time zones, different logistical requirements, concerns about exclusion or inclusion, others feeling not properly included. There has to be a very well thought out process, and maybe there are countries that have been able to do this. Maybe we need to do some sort of benchmarking, not in the sense our politicians do, but one that is meant to improve the service and ensure that every Kenyan feels included and part of the civic duty in developing the country. I love the progress that is being done, and I totally understand the fact that Dr. is not speaking on behalf of IEBC, but are doing a good job with the working group to ensure that at least there's an inclusion, because I think the country cannot be happy to receive diasporians' support in terms of remittances, but not want to include them in matters governance, because I think they are a very critical component of this country's development. So I think for me it's good to know that there's a group of Kenyans generally who are looking at the betterment of what can improve our country, but at the same time realize how arduous as a task it is to ensure that it becomes aligned, but at least the desire and the intention is there, and so that makes a big difference, Eli. So I don't have much in terms of questioning. I have other people. I've seen Godwin is on the space as well, and analyst, and Rush the Dawn. If they would like to contribute, I'd be happy to have them on the speaker to be able to ask the questions or make their contributions. But Flavia said you'll be running in a few minutes. Thank you so much again for finding time for us. And in your new bid and desire, we'll try and ensure that we support you to try and ensure that you get to represent Kenya and Kenyans in the sense that you desire, and probably and better make a big difference going forward. So thank you so much. Eli, back to you.
Asante sana, That is Obed's, and Obed's, he tries to be very diplomatic in his language, but nimeona vile alikuwa anaenda angetupoteza. No, kidding. Anyway, being a Monday, we appreciate the fact that you guys are making time to just not listen in, but also contribute. If you're joining us on TikTok and you love to also contribute to the talk, we definitely want to hear you. If you're Kenyan diaspora, for that matter, this is a very important topic for you to engage in. And as we said, we are not in any way here taking Dr. Martin as an IEBC representative. However, we are leaning on the fact that he has had an opportunity to interact and also closely work together with a conglomerate of young Kenyans and, of course, experienced Kenyans living abroad and working abroad who are keen in ensuring that this right of vote is not just a pipe dream, but a reality. But talking about reality check, Dr. Martin, we are fast closing into the 2027 elections. And one will wonder, is there a miracle turnaround to ensure these 16 countries will be ready for elections? If we were to do a crash program, what will be the first important things you think need to be put into place, except the budget, of course?
Yeah, first of all, Eli, let me try and highlight a few areas so that the listeners and indeed those who watch your channel can be able to understand the amount of work that is working behind the scenes. And as they say, a tree grows upwards, but no one takes a look at the roots. The roots also grow downwards, and they do more hard work than normal. So let me try and give just a perspective of what we are doing underneath. One of the policy interventions we think will improve this issue is the voter registration. The voter registration should be a continuous process. We should not have a case where a window is open, it is closed, and then you're told, now we can't allow you to register. We understand the IEBC has to clean the data, it has to make sure that the data integrity is maintained, and so forth. But I think that is one intervention that will really solve a lot of issues, especially when it comes to specific times, because some of us, you change your passport, you change your ID, you change your name. And these things take place along the lifeline or the lifetime of an existing parliamentary session before the next generation. So voter registration should be, in our opinion, made a continuous process so that we have people who are registering on a continuous basis and we can monitor that. The other issue is making sure that we have what we call a data-driven IEBC, and indeed use data to make sure that we can make specific intervention. Let me give you an example. For example, we've talked about cities or states in the US that have the largest number of Kenyans. So we are talking about Minneapolis, we are talking about, or Minnesota for that matter. We are talking about Dallas in Texas, or even Houston, for those of you who might have gone in those areas. We are talking about Atlanta. We are talking about Washington, D.C., Seattle. So these are areas that have been identified to have very high number of Kenyans. But the point is, do we know how many? I think that's a question that lingers in everybody's mind.
Yeah, but
do we know
which
areas?
To do that, Dr. Martin, because Kenyans have over and over stated they don't want to share their data with their government. I mean, I know the State Department for Diaspora Affairs has actually talked about this in the past. Why don't Kenyans want to share? But without derailing your train of thoughts, maybe at one point we just want to discuss that, but I'll allow you to proceed.
But actually, now that you mentioned, let me try and get that in the argument.
Yeah.
Because I've talked about data, the State Department of Diaspora Affairs has actually put out a platform, and it's called the Diaspora Integrated Information Management System, DIMS. DIMS, if you go onto the platform, for those of you who have not either engaged with the platform, I would urge you to try it out. If you go to the platform, it has got various options that you can take. So for example, you could maybe put your details as we know it, and I think it's very minimal details, not necessarily up to where you were born and so forth, but just minimal detail, your contact your email, and so forth, which you can be reached in case of an emergency. But there's also the idea that you might have an issue that you want to post in terms of a request. So you might have maybe a need for an ID or a need for some identification document that has been lost or something. So you can put that. They also have an option where you can say, I'm arriving in Kenya on this particular date and I want to book a conference room. So they have even an option where you can have a place to meet. Most of us, when we're in Nairobi or in Kenya, for example, you wonder where should you meet your guests, where should you meet people to do any business, to consult people. So they have something which is offered. Now, this is good as far as what it offers. But what we've argued is that it could be enhanced further. For example, there should be a way of how you can use the system to also be able to verify your IEBC details, for example. So there could be a link between the DIM system and the IEBC. I know IEBC is an independent body. They keep data to themselves, but there are technology that you can use to interrogate data using DIMS. Now, for those of you who are wondering how do I access it, you can actually access the system through eCitizen.
Hold on.
Yeah.
Don't you think this will be redundant? Because IEBC itself has its own platform where you can do that directly without having to do via. I mean, I'm just thinking, even as we try to expand that idea.
Yeah, so me as an avid user, and also for diasporians who haven't interacted with this system, it's accessible through eCitizen. If you have access to eCitizen, meaning you've got the valid access, then you can access the DIMS portion of that particular area where you can interact with it. Now, to come back to your question, yes, there are some specific trust issues that we have, and also IEBC. What I'm saying is that when you have a system that can be accessed by your identification as a citizen of Kenya, like eCitizen, then you can create what we call the Chinese walls between the eCitizen system and the DIM, that means the DIMS system, which is within eCitizen, and the IEBC system, so that a message can be sent to the system, because it is an issue of trust. And the information that is on the IEBC can be sent back to your information that is within the DIM system to say, yes, I can recognize who you are. I think you are registered under ABCD. That could be one way. But what we are saying, and let us not confuse terms, is that that is something in progress. And it's a proposal that we've made as a working group to say that there has to be a way that we can use the available systems that are trusted by citizens, especially where we are, to be able to access other services, including, if possible, in the most secure way, our information on the IEBC platform. So that is just a proposal.
But you see,
and then
when you talk about, let's not, I don't want us to go away from this issue of the data, because it's important, Daktari. I am thinking, and you hear saying, one of the main reasons why maybe the IEBC, for example, is having problems to even have data-driven IEBC, especially for the diaspora, is because some of these Kenyans are not willing to surrender their whereabouts. All right?
Yes, yes.
So the question there becomes, how then do we ensure Kenyans feel secure sharing their information with relevant government parastatals or organizations that are supposed to provide specific services, or, you know, whatever it is, to ensure that you as a Kenyan, you are enjoying your rights? Because at the end of the day, the trust issue has become probably one of the main reasons we cannot even know how many Kenyans are living, working abroad.
And Eli, I absolutely agree with you that the onus of having a system that is trusted by all, and of course, you and I agree, we can never convince everybody. But if we can convince the majority, it will be a good idea. So what we've urged, and this is something which is open, is for what we call value. The system has to provide an incentivization for a diasporian to feel confident enough, safe enough to put the information into the system. So there has to be a reciprocal issue called value. So what value do I get if my name and my details are in the system? For example, they could say that those who registered on the system can be shortlisted for a specific position in the country. Or they could say those who have registered on the system. So there's a way that you can bring value to that particular system. But I come back to your point.
That one I
and
don't
I'm not
agree,
trying,
but it's all right. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'm coming back to the point that there has to be, there's room for improvement.
Yeah.
There has to be some incentives that are provided by the system to be able to allow more people to register and indeed to trust the system that it will be used. I work in the security sector, and over surveillance is an issue where data that is provided by citizens voluntarily for a specific purpose is used for a different purpose. And I think I agree with you in that particular space. Yeah. We need to make sure that that is guarded. So I come back to that point. But just coming back to
Let
the
me engage
area
you on
that
the
I
same,
talked about.
okay? Because this is not moving anywhere anytime soon. And I'm sorry, because it's still
it's
touching
fine,
on the data-driven IEBC, all right?
Correct,
I'll give you an example. We have some numbers being thrown, probably 20, 30K of Kenyans in the Middle East, Dubai, Qatar, Saudi Arabia. You know, there are those numbers that are flying all over. And certainly we cannot really point a number on it. When you talk about incentivizing Kenyans, I think the first thing any Kenyan outside the borders want to feel is that their government actually does care about them. And that's why I would want to reveal my whereabouts. That's important. Number two, I'll give you an example, because recently I interacted with a Kenyan living in Saudi Arabia, and they told me we have seen so many bad things happening to domestic workers from Kenya. And some of these domestic violences that are happening are actually not just with the employers, but with the agents that are managing, and most of them are actually Kenyan agents. So if you're on, quote unquote, government agency, but it's not a government agency, that's why I put quotes in that, does not give you the aspect of feeling safe, and you go now to an embassy, for example, and they tell you that is your issue to deal with, or you have to bribe yourself around to be able to access some consular services, of what value is you sharing your data?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And one of the things that we've pointed out to the State Department, and indeed to some of the committees that deal with these related issues. For example, recently we met the committee that deals with defense, intelligence, and foreign relations. It's a very powerful committee because it determines some of the budgets that we're talking about here for even the same ministry or the same State Department. And we put forward the idea that when you look at our remittance, which we've talked about from time to time, and right now it's sitting at roughly about over 650 million or billion Kenya shillings. The argument has been that could there be a line of budget that is put aside from that particular remittance that we make? And of course, the Kenyan government probably takes roughly about maybe 15% or whatever of that remittance that we make, to be able to plow it back into the services that diasporians require. And ring fence that amount of money so that these services that we call for, and the disenfranchisement of voting, and the less amount of money that is apportioned for diaspora voting infrastructure could be increased. So that could be an argument that could be looked at some point to enable diasporians to have what we call the convenience of operations and even any daily activities they have. The same thing goes to say that the IEBC in its whole ecosystem must be also futuristic. It should think about the future. And we've argued and pushed the point that technology cannot be put aside, especially when it comes to the verification of people who are trying to vote. Remember, we're only voting for the presidential. And that could be a very good starting point where the IEBC could use lightweight technology over and above the KIMS kits and the type of technology that has already been approved to improve our interaction with the IEBC system. And a good example, as I said earlier, was, for example, When you have registered, it means your biometric information is taken. It means they've taken a few details from your identification documents, and you have said who you are. So physically, somebody can say, this person whom who is called this name, and with this associated biometric input was here and registered. The question then becomes, how do you verify that this person is in the system? And we are saying there is technology to do that. We all open accounts remotely. We all send money via M-Pesa. We get loans through banks remotely. So there are ways of how you can do three-way authentication, two-way authentication that can verify it is who you are. So these issues, as we said, are progressive, but we want the IEBC to do more. That's why I came to the point of data-driven. But let me go back to another point.
Yeah.
The other point that will be very useful would be on a daily basis, the State Department, of course, has what they call the mobile consular services that go to specific countries to help diasporians to get their IDs, their documents, and even to listen and be able to engage them. The call here is to expand what that consular service means and to have it data-driven so that we can be able to collect the data that we require, not necessarily valuable data that is personal to the individual, but data that can enable decision-making to be more accurate, to save more costs, and to be able to be agile. So this is where we are driving ourselves. But I come back to your point. There has to be a trust. There's a trust deficit. That one we accept. There is a need to improve that trust deficit to a level that Kenyans can trust the system. But overall, is what we do with that data that must be consistent and compliant with, of course, the GDP, depending on where the GDPR, depending on where you are, or any other specific compliance that data is normally given, especially in countries abroad. But back to you on those ones. But that's what I wanted to make sure that we get it listened to.
So I hear you, and I appreciate you actually trying to break down this aspect. Yes, I see Obed has something itchy. Go ahead, Obed.
So the element of I'm actually not so sure our government has details in terms of how many Kenyans are in particular places, and the IEBC probably wouldn't have that if government does not have. There's probably an inkling of what it is, but we don't have the specific details. And as you say, the element of how do you incentivize people to, register or offer their information when the government has proven over time that they are not competent enough to even support Kenyans when there's a serious, issues against Kenyans in different parts of the world. Maybe it has to start from that. There's no trust in government taking care of its own properly. And maybe that raises the fear that, or, makes people feel like, what's the use for me to give the information when I'll probably be in a situation that really needs government support. I'll still probably not get the support. So that's why I think I look at it from. Maybe government has to start and including the IEBC and anybody trying to do it, especially with the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, try to find a way to make Kenyans start to have that element of trust, that government is honestly and genuinely interested in their welfare, as opposed to just looking at them as cash machines that are remitting money to the country. Maybe that would be how it should be looked at. Any other way, I think, would feel like you're just collecting statistics and you're treating them as statistics, which then adds no value, and that's why nobody would have an incentive to do it. I think that's how I look at it.
Yeah, I think you have a point, if I may, because the idea around using data to provide a service must be very symmetrical so that the person who is providing data can appreciate that I am getting a service based on what I provided. And you're right, when there's a distress call, I know the State Department, from what we've gathered and from the information that we've got, has tried its best to be able to address specific distress calls. And I know these were very rampant. You remember, I think at the beginning of last year, I believe there were issues in Vietnam. Then it moved on. We've had issues, of course, every time in the Middle East, and then up to recently in Russia. But there are specific efforts that I would argue, or everybody would argue, that could be done better. And I think, Obed, you're right, that in my view, if we have what we call the interdepartmental coordination that is effective, because you've got different agencies talking to different ministries with different timelines, I think that could improve, whereby if it is an immigration issue, there is something that is triggered from the Ministry of Migration that is concerned with that issue, all the way to an SDDA, so that things can be raised quickly. So I think that is something. But also, the amount of money that is put for this kind of operations could also be a factor. But I know every Kenyan, whenever you mention money, the issue of how we use it and how we spend it becomes a key component. So I agree with you that there is room for improvement. The agencies that are concerned are trying their best. One could argue that these issues could have been worse if we didn't have a State Department of Diaspora. But now that we have one, I think it's our duty to always give what we call a reciprocative feedback of where things have gone wrong, and also to a level where operations are done. But you and I are on the same page. There's need for improvement, and I agree on that.
All right, there's room for improvement and there's much we can do. Now, we are almost coming to the end of this talk, and I believe there's so much to unpack. And, you know, Daktari, when we talk about diaspora
Sure.
issues, you start with elections, you end up with passports and IDs, you come back to who was deported. And this is very difficult conversation, being that all we can do here is do what we say, sharing of knowledge and information. But again, if you have different information, you will love to add value to this talk. We invite you in the next sessions so that we can be able to really expound more and share with one another, and eventually make it even possible, not just to dream as a Kenyan living in diaspora, but also live that dream to reality. In my formative introductory remarks, Daktari, I mentioned that the diaspora vote is not very consequential in terms of other elective positions, but this is a vote that can only go to the president as it sits right now. Many have argued that they need to also select or elect their members of parliament, their senators, their MCAs, whatever that comes in terms of those elective positions. Do you really think there's value in a Kenyan diaspora voting their MP, MCA, or any other thing? And why is it important that this constitution, so we need to vote for the president? What are the dynamics?
You know, when it comes to the issue of expanding that democratic right to include representatives at county, constituency, ward, and so forth, there are specific things that diasporans need to be aware of. The diaspora is what we call, it's a morphing environment. It moves like the clouds. So to really box it completely becomes a bit of a challenge. But let's copy from, not copy, but let's take arguments from what has worked in other jurisdictions. In some jurisdictions, even in France, if you look at their parliament, there are specific representatives of diaspora in parliament as per their constitution. If you take specific areas, or even if you take Kigali, for example, in Rwanda, there's also a representative of diaspora in parliament. The argument that we've put across is that there is a need for representation of diaspora. However, it has to be based on a structure. Let's take an example. So we are a continent, or we are a world of 7 continents, or 7 or 8, depending on how you look at it. And we have got diasporans in every corner of the world. Let's assume that. So really, this person who is wherever they are, whether it's in the Arctic or in the Pacific, they require a representation. So you have to look at a structure that says, how do you demarcate the globe so that you have what we call a physical identification that is also legally representative or legally recognized where diasporans are residing. So one example would be, could we say that the region of Africa that has 55 countries and has roughly about 5 regions, whether it's north, west, south, east, central, could have representatives that are coming out of that to be elected in parliament to be able to represent diaspora? That could be one argument. The other one would be, could political parties make it a priority to be able to have diaspora representatives who are nominated to be able to go to parliament? That also could be one argument, because you go in representing the special groups, just the same way women are represented, just the same way people with disability or those kind of special groups that are represented. Could that be an avenue? And I think that's what many of the political parties have tried to pursue. What is challenging is that many of these parties do not have what we call a constitution that is amended to fit with the diaspora aspirations. Now, within there's some parties that, and I don't want to go into political debate because I know this is not for that today, but it would be good that people think through this in that way. But coming back to your point, it is important to have that representation. The second issue that is important for diasporans to, I'll explain, because when you have a representation of somebody representing diaspora, let's assume we have a very good mechanism of choosing somebody from the diaspora to represent us, whether it's from the region, the continent, or country. Let's assume there is a process, okay, that takes somebody to represent us. Now, this person has to be accountable to his or her constituents. The constituents are not in the country. They are in the diaspora. So therefore, we need what we call a way of how we can hold that representative accountable to our aspirations.
Are we going to form another diaspora constitution for Kenyans? I just want to understand the matrices around this. And not in any way boxing you out of the talk, because really, matters elections and the diaspora, everything and anything in between. As I told you, it's a moving.
No, this is okay. Yeah. So to be a bit specific, there are specific groups that have pushed for County 48, right?
Yeah,
which is a very valid argument. There are specific groups that have said we are referred to as constituency 291. That's actually how diaspora is referred.
Yeah, for the
question
of elections.
Is it in the constitution? And that is not the case, because the constitution recognizes 290 number of constituencies, but not 291. In fact, IEBC had to come up with 291 to make sure that it could facilitate that. Therefore, there is what we call a need to, first of all, understand what structure will be suitable for the diaspora to have what we call effective representation.
Correct.
That argument has to be at the table. The second one is, if we agree on a specific structure, then what are the policy and the mechanisms that have to be put in place that allow us to vote and elect these representatives? Because remember, they're not in Kenya, they're in the diaspora. So we need a mechanism that will allow us. But all this, as I said, has to be hinged in the Constitution.
Correct.
So what that means, it's an amendment of the Constitution in a very big way.
That means,
and you and I know that that process is like, I mean, if there's a will, there's a way. And I'm not saying that this is impossible. It's possible. And those who have the proponents and colleagues who have actually advocated for County 48 have a valid argument. And those of us who are saying, well, let's start from the lower hanging fruits, building up to the process where we can be able to manage these issues, also have an argument. But it's really a concerted effort that requires the political will from members of parliament, stakeholders, but diasporans themselves. But what I think could be useful in the next general election, because I'm sure your viewers and listeners would want something that can work in the next general election, is the issue of the political parties to prioritize diaspora representatives in their nomination process. And what that will mean, you'll have at least somebody representing diaspora in the Senate, you'll have somebody representing diaspora in the National Assembly, and even counties, if they are very ambitious, they could have an MCA of diaspora at the county level. So this is what we are putting out there as a choice that we have in order to move this needle of diaspora representation forward. So that representation is critical. And then who holds that person accountable could be us in the diaspora, because we shall say, hey, you are not performing, you're not doing this, and therefore their parties will be able to understand that their persons are not doing what they're supposed to do. So that is my, what you call 5 cents contribution in that. I know it's a long one, but we have a roadmap for it. We have some ideas, and we are trying to talk to the right people to make sure that we are understood. And then this can create that written answer. Thank you. Back to you.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Dr. Martin. And Dr. Martin, as you speak right now, it will be interesting to note that the president, that is the head of state, is currently in Rome. And as you speak, he's meeting the Kenyan diaspora in Italy. This is an invitation I received, but because serikali kunilipia fare na mimi sina pesa ya mafuta, sikuenda. I see the hand of Obeds is here. Obeds.
You nearly made me feel like God. When you say the hand of... So, Eli, I think there's something that Martin has spoken to about diaspora representation. Quite an interesting one, because also when you look at the statutory documents that IEBC once approved in Parliament, one of the things they're saying in terms of nomination, they're looking at having alternating, in terms of the order of the names that should come first is a female name and then alternated with a male name, so that they are trying to meet the requirement for the 2/3 gender rule through that, so that the first person to be considered for nomination should be a lady, and then a man in between and a lady, a man and then a lady, in that order. And so when he speaks to diaspora representation, it's interesting and intriguing to think if I would probably pose it that if the Kenyan political group and class and political parties were properly structured, that is something probably possible. But given how and the nature of our politics in this country and our political parties and the way they are designed, that could come as a long shot, but still, it's a good way of trying to at least involve the diaspora in matters governance. And so they'd feel the need for them probably to want to participate more and have more of them represented, or represent the diaspora when the opportunity presents itself. But I find it, I think it's a long shot, unless he has a basis to believe that probably there's a chance that could be given early. I think what I tend to see more is politicians come across, they go to the diaspora when they are fundraising and looking for resources and campaigning. And that's pretty much where it ends, because if anything, diaspora is very important and they have a huge contribution to make. They make indirectly to our democracy and civic duty and governance, and they cannot be ignored. So yes, it's a good way of involving them, but I fear it's a long shot because of the structure of our political parties and the nature of our politics, in the sense that you'll be deemed to be far, and then it will be assumed that you cannot make much of a contribution. And then there's the requirement for parliamentary attendance. I don't know how that can be managed, or unless I didn't understand correctly how that works.
Actually, let me make a point about parliamentary attendance. Remember, you can be penalized and you can even lose your seat if you're out of parliament sittings for a certain number of parliamentary sittings. And therefore, you being in the diaspora could actually jeopardize that particular process. So the idea now would be to make sure that that is understood clearly. Who is this representative and what are the leverages? And I think all this comes to the Constitution. It has to look into those cases. So to come back to your point, this is a long shot. Yes, it is, but it is something to be considered. But what could be the lower hanging fruits is parties to have a process of nominating a diaspora person into parliament. The argument that a member of parliament from diaspora is going to work for us is actually neither here nor there, because many of the members of parliament represent the constituents who elected them in Kenya. They might have an experience of how the diaspora works. They might be very influential when it comes to debates. They might also contribute in committees because they've been in the diaspora. But our experience is very clear that the members who represent specific constituencies in the country who have been in the diaspora would gravitate towards their own constituents, but not necessarily gravitate towards the diaspora. So that's what we see from time to time. And therefore, the argument that somebody has been in the diaspora, when they go back to compete for a seat or to get a specific elected position, they will be able to work for the diaspora. It is very, very difficult to equate that or to get any dividends from that. What we see from practical sense is that many of the representatives, as soon as they arrive and they are elected by their constituencies, whether in the Senate or in the National Assembly, they would definitely gravitate to representing their people. And their people have a right to seek the full attention of their representative, because that representative has won a seat based on their votes. So that's why they have a right to really seek that mandate and be there. What we are calling for is a way that parties can get at least several people in parliament, and then those people can be able to represent the diaspora, and that I think might be able to start this kind of flow and argument to start making sense. Back to you.
Asante sana. That is Dr. Martin Koyabe. And Dr. you've been very effective in having this conversation. I think this is almost the third time you're making it to our studios. And we do hope the next time we also call upon you, you'll make yourself available. But quick takeaways for us as we try to conclude the talk. Maybe before I just get final remarks from the other side of the studio, I would love to find out from you, Dr. The 2027 elections are almost here. The populace seems to be divided between who is who, and you are in that party that is currently leading us as a country. Do we have, as a diaspora, any possible tangible input we can make sure we are putting into this election so that the elections are not just another religious activity, but rather effective political discussion? And what would that be for the diaspora?
Now, this is a very important question, because every person has what we call a marking scheme to say, what have they gotten from the current government, of course, that we help to bring to fruition, and what are the areas that are there for improvement? And there's no doubt there are specific areas where one would argue that we have done well, especially the formation of the Diaspora State Department, which I argued last time, some of the issues that have come up, but also areas that what one could argue that needs more consideration and improvement, which is always the case in a political cycle. But coming back to the point of diasporians making a decision, it's important, first of all, we emphasize that diasporians, you need to participate in the political process and also the governance process, if possible, because politics actually affects the lifetime, every aspect of our life. And I think that's an argument that is already there, and we all agree on that. So because of that, it's important that we participate. The government of the day should also provide what we call channels of engagement, where the rights and what we call the fundamental rights of diasporians and what is legally supposed to be ours and what we need to do can be channeled in the right way. But one thing that I want to come back, Eli, is the issue of value. We need an ecosystem that values the diaspora in a way that is commensurate with the effort that is being put in. For example, when we are talking about diaspora, let us not talk about diaspora as the remittance, the people who remit. It should be more than that. And we've said there are three areas that diasporians bring on the table. One is the level of expertise, experience, and also the issue around the networks that they have, and these networks are large. When you talk about them, that they bring at the table. But one point that I think that is also very clear is the generation that is coming. Remember, we have a younger generation that has not or does not even have any of the documents that we're talking about, whether it's an ID or a passport. But in lineage of their blood, they are Kenyans. So the question would be, how do we make sure that we leverage that asset that this generation has, because they are more equipped with the latest technology, whether it is artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and so forth, which the country desperately needs, but they are here. So we need to find a way of how to bring them, and unless they understand the political process and how we do that, we need that. The IEBC, on the other hand, has a full responsibility to make sure that the elections are fair, free, and also accessible to all. So I think with that, I see that the diaspora has that critical component. One point that I don't want to forget, you said that how do we bring the impact of the diaspora in the elections? We've always argued that one diasporian can influence 100 people back in Kenya. So let us not be seen as a small number that has got no significance. In fact, it is said that maybe the diaspora could be the swing vote if things are calculated very well. So the idea around our influence not being as much might not necessarily be true, looking at what influence we have in our remittance and support of our families and the businesses and other areas that we are contributing to, but also more importantly, our ideas and the networks that we have, that we are able to influence specific ideas of how things can be done. But all in all, we wish that all diasporans bring their young people in their household, let them get the voters card when that time comes, and let us improve the numbers from the 10,444 to a larger number, depending on how the convenience is. But really, the conversation with the IEBC will be critical for us to have a dialogue, exchange ideas, see how we can manage some challenges, and also emphasize on the opportunities that are there. Back to you.
Asante sana. That is Dr. Martin Koyabe. And Dr. Martin Koyabe, of course, is a very interesting gentleman, not just because of his grasp of technology matters, but his understanding surrounding issues that touch on the diaspora community. And for those of you who missed out on this session, we want, first of all, to apologize to our X-Space session because they did have some audio difficulties. But you shall not fear. We had a backup for you. So once this stream is out, we'll be able to re-upload that on our YouTube. And of course, we have part of this YouTube stream right now on Mizani 254. And you can also watch the recorded broadcast on our X platform. That is through the X broadcast. Just go onto Mizani 254. You'll be able to find the link and rewatch. That said, ladies and gentlemen, being a Monday na tumefanya kazi mingi, I'm about to get this jacket out because I can be very, very interesting when it comes to music, but we'll do music later. Before that, let's have final remarks from my colleague, Obeds. Obeds, before we can release Daktari, your mic, kindly proceed.
Thank you, Ella, and I really would love to thank Daktari for taking time and really eloquently explaining his understanding of issues around diasporan issues. And being in the working committee or group has really helped and gives us an insight of what it is. I think it's imperative, as I said earlier, that the diaspora be involved, not just as a group that remits resources to the country, but also actively participates in matters governance and civic in every aspect of our country. So we look forward to and we'll keep an eye on what IEBC is doing in the direction of, involving the diaspora, especially in terms of increasing the number of registered voters and the places they can register, as well as the number of people who can vote, and so that as many Kenyans who are out there who would like to participate and contribute to this civic duty can do so without feeling, excluded in any way. It's a lot of work to be done. As I said again, too many logistical issues required to be taken care of. But a step in a good direction is always a good thing because it makes a huge difference. At least there's a beginning, and in beginning, then you start to improve the process. You do a process mapping, see what is not working, what can be improved, and I think the long and short of it is that eventually we'll get it right, and probably we become an example to other African countries on how to do elections, including diaspora. So that said, I think it's been an informative conversation, and I look forward to many more of this nature. And I guess that's it from me. Thank you very much.
Asante sana, Obeds. Again, Obeds, very, very grateful for you joining us from the X session. You've been very instrumental in ensuring that through this conversation was steered irrespective of the hiccups that we've had. But that said, ladies and gentlemen, it is Monday. The bigger picture comes to an end, but the conversation stays live on our X spaces. You can always tag us at Likuyani_Eli or Eli_Likuyani. My guest of the night was none other than Dr. Martin Koyabe, and he's the gentleman you're seeing right now on your screen. Follow him on X at Koyabe. Yeah, he's the only one. I think I've tried to look for other Koyabes, I haven't. And he's a Kenya Diaspora Leader based in the UK and also a member of the Diaspora Technical Working Group. Also, he prides himself as being one of the UK or UDA-based diaspora member. So, mimi nimesema kwa sababu sijapokea pesa mingi ya kufanya siasa, sitafanya siasa, nitafanya kitu tunasema civic education. And I do hope really we have been able to add value, not just to the knowledge you had earlier on, but you leave this space even more challenged to think through on how we can be able not just to advocate for the diaspora rights, but also contribute to the national building home and away. Ladies and gentlemen, again, many thanks for joining us. As always, I'm your host, Likuyani Eli, and as I bid farewell to my good friend, Dr. Martin, all we can say is we're looking very much forward to seeing you in the next session. For now, have yourself a great evening, and as always, thank you for making yourself available to us.
Thank you very much, Eli, and also to your listeners and viewers. Many thanks. Have a nice evening.
Asante. So yes, that was Dr. Martin. And Dr. Martin, again, just a quick recap of his profile. He is an ICT, that is a global ICT and cybersecurity expert with over 30 years of experience shaping digital transformation, policy and innovation across Africa and internationally. He's also a senior advisor at the Global Forum on Cyber Expertise Africa and founder of MWK Consult. He leads major continental initiatives advancing cyber capacity and resilience. Definitely, you want to know more about him, find him on X at Koyabe is his handle. And again, I saw some great remarks coming from the likes of Ken254. Thank you, Ken. You say that is a very interesting proposal on how we can deal with matters of representation. But right now, when my jacket gets off, it's time for us to really look into other matters. Inamaanisha tunaanza sasa mambo mazuri. So you can join me live on radio. That is www.kotfm.co.ke. My name is Likuyani Eli, and that was, of course, ladies and gentlemen, The Bigger Picture, which continues live on X. Follow us on X, that is at KotFM_KE, at Mizani254. That is our handle. Good night for now for all our viewers on X, and for those on radio, tuendelee kuchapa kazi. Up next is Busy featuring Inos B. Angelina is the title of the track.
Kot FM. Let the music play.
Je fais que d'envoyer, tout le monde me regarde, normal je suis soigné. T'es massé floc avec casser mon délai. Je fais danser les blacks, les rebelles, les mondiales. Angelina, s'il te plaît danse pour moi. Angelina, c'est que je peux t'être pour toi. Lina, Lina, t'es ma, vérité.